Hello, and welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong, the home of precision guided selling. And today, I'm legit excited to be here with Andy Paul. Andy, a lot of you will know him. He runs his own podcast. And I think he's got about 50,000 subscribers. The author of Sell Without Selling Out, a new book coming out soon, as I understand it.
In a
Founder of
year.
the Sales. All right, that's soon ish.
It'll go by quickly. I'm in the throes, the final revisions. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, having been there a couple of times, I appreciate what it takes to get that done. Andy also is. It's funny. I was looking through your website, and I love your focus on win rates and the win rate consulting that you do, and we'll probably talk about some of that. But before any of that, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Brian.
I'm honored to interview the podcaster of podcasters. I told you in an offline conversation that when I started mine, I went and looked at yours, and I was like, "What does this guy do that's so dang good?" And so I really am excited. I really am excited to have you there. So,
well, thank you.
You and I were chatting a week or so ago, and you were talking about the role of methodology. Let's just go something super street level right away. The role of methodology in the current environment. Yeah, tell me why you brought that up. What are your thoughts on that?
That's fine. I was just thinking about it again today. As I was reading a post somebody posted on LinkedIn about, you just can't have a chance of succeeding unless you have a methodology and in sales. And I'm kind of ambivalent about that whole thing because I don't think that's true. I think that many companies have succeeded extremely well without having an embedded methodology.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just talking to somebody about a company I'd worked for at one time. That's now I worked on in very early days. They're now a multi-billion-dollar company, but I took them from help them go from 5 mil to 100+ million, but they don't have a sales function. They don't have a sales VP. They don't have of sales. They sell differently. They sell on sort of a program basis. But the point being is that there's lots of different ways to do this. And this idea that, you're be lost if you don't have the standardized methodology that's propagated throughout the entire sales team is just wrong. I mean, there's a couple reasons. One is that, if you look at average win rates across B2B selling, and let's just take the SaaS world, the data that came out in SaaS and software. So 18 to 20% average win rates across all 5 different ACV segments from low to high. A book came out a few years ago, said in B2B sales for deals greater than 100K, which pretty modest sized deals, average win rate 17% across 15 different industry segments. And it's like, well, hey, if the methodology is so good, why do we suck so badly at winning deals, right? And so that, I think, is really the issue, is we think, hey, the methodologies are the end-all, be-all, but the fact is, you look at what's happening in trends and sales performance, and methodologies aren't what's making the difference. And also there's we have disagreement about what constitutes a methodology. I mean, MEDDIC is not a methodology. MEDDIC is a framework. MEDDPIC is a framework. It's not a methodology. And I think there's a tremendous amount of value in frameworks. In fact, I think intuitively what my long years of experience in this field are telling me is that we've gone through this era in the last 20 years or so where the emphasis has been on, let's have a standardized way of selling. The technology enables us to implement a more standardized way of selling. But when you look at the results, hey, there's no standardized way of making decisions on the part of the buyers, right? And so when these methodologies hit the whole cold, hard reality of human behavior on the parts of the buyers, they sort of fall apart. And
I'm hearing this more and more lately, that like the linear notion is just more and more so. Like I've heard this often. It's going out the door, and linear process just doesn't work.
Well, and the buyer's not making a decision in a linear fashion.
Right.
And they're not doing it in stages the way that, we lay out our sales. So we've gone, and you and I both know, I mean, I've been around longer than you have, but we've both been around a long time, is this whole notion of sales stages is relatively recent in the history of B2B selling. I mean, they
Yeah.
really became institutionalized once we started having the CRM as a tool to track what we were doing. People saying, well, what's a logical way to track our progress? Well, let's create these stages, right? And my argument and my belief is that, okay, there's some value to understanding what you're supposed to be doing when, but it should align with what the buyer is doing and what they need from us as sellers. And instead, we flip that on its head, and our stages are all about what we need to extract from the buyer.
Right.
And it's all about us instead of us helping them. And so, yeah, I think we've gone through this phase. And as you mentioned, as I mentioned as well, I think we're going to come out of this a little bit differently. And yeah, I saw an interesting quote, big soccer fan and read a lot about soccer, but there's been this similar sort of trend in management of soccer teams where it became very much about the process and the much more rigid compliance to certain styles and
Yeah.
formations that they used and so on. And there was this article by this well-known soccer writer saying, yeah, you can see the trend from talking to managers. What's saying is, look, we need to be less about a rigid formation and more about providing our players a platform
Hmm.
on which they can extemporize, right? Meaning respond to what's happening in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's, I
Yeah.
think, one of the great things that's been missing, important things that have been missing from selling, for sellers and brought up in this more rigid compliance-oriented era, is that when things go sideways, they don't know how to adapt.
So I wonder, a conversation comes to mind. Adam Cuzart was until recently the head of product at Outreach. And his firm was acquired by Outreach, right? He built their forecasting tool. He made, to me, a really interesting point that he said all the tools and maybe even methodologies were based on the ability to aggregate data because that's all we had, like from a technological perspective. And he said, but now and aggregating hard data and linear steps. But he said now with the advent of AI, we can aggregate qualitative data and reactions. And it just struck me as just this massive enabler to allow us to think differently about what you just said, right? If we can now aggregate qualitative data and look at trends of things that are always shifting. I just wonder how you if you feel similar that tech is enabling us to rethink some of this.
Well, yes and no, right? So I think the challenge is for people as they're envisioning how do we use AI most effectively in sales is to change their mindset about what sort of the basic selling buying formula is, right? And
Hmm.
as long as we saying, look, we're going to apply AI within the sort of this structured linear sequential model that's really fundamental at us and our time frames and what we need, and make it less about the buyer and what the buyer needs from us in order to help them make decisions, then we're just going to repeat the errors I think we've made with sales technology. And which, for all the virtues some of the sales technologies have, I still believe fundamentally they haven't fulfilled their potential, because just look at the results, right? Just as people say, scoreboard. Look at scoreboard. Look at win rates. Win rates are
Yeah.
in the toilet. Quota attainment's down. Buyer dissatisfaction with sellers perhaps has never been higher based on studies from Gartner and Forrester and others. It's because we're stuck in this mindset about what selling is, and it's not serving us, right? So we can put
So
all the
you,
technology we want into it, but it's unless we change that mindset about what our job is as
yeah.
sellers, it's not going to change the outcomes.
Well, that leads me to something you said to me last week about uh, for 25 years we've not been really selling or executing real selling. I feel like it's connected to what you were just saying. So what? Yeah, expound on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, when you become more compliance oriented, is then sellers act in a way to sort of optimize the performance to expectations about compliance. So instead of selling authentically, where sales has become performative. right? I know I'm being judged or a number of meetings I'm going to set. So I'm going to optimize the things I do to set meetings rather than optimize my learning and my skill development, everything to be able to help my buyer make decisions more effectively so I can win a higher fraction of my deals.
Yep.
And so, to some degree, we get so distracted by elements of data that we've taken our eye off the ball. And yeah, I'll make the claim here is that I think that if you're in a business where your average win rates are at 20%, let's say in software world, if your company has an average win rate of in the 20% range, I'll tell you right now, you're not serious about sales. Full stop. If you accept win rates that low,
Yeah.
you're just not serious about it. No matter what you say, you're not serious about it.
Well, it's
you have people on payroll that you're paying, sellers base salary.
Yep.
Why aren't you investing if they got a individual with a 20% win rate? Why aren't you investing to make that 21%, 22, 25%? Why isn't that number one on your list as a manager about what to change? Because certainly if you're in a recurring revenue business, hey, the impact of each 1% increase this year in your win rate on your recurring revenue in subsequent years is pretty substantial.
Yes. Yeah. I just had a CSO say that to me. If we can get 2 points on our renewals, like the impact is massive. And but back to the win rate thing, Jim Dickey was telling me a couple of weeks ago that in one of his studies that win rates moved about 2 points in 20 years, which is like what you just said. I know to be true when he gave me that. And then you think about the billions that have been thrown at investments and two points of movement in 20 years. He also said that top of the funnel has been the number one investment for 10 years in companies. So there's a bunch of stuff that's not working.
Oh, yeah, not working at all, right? I mean, it's this is what I was talking about before, how the mindset has to change.
Yeah.
Right. I have several conversations and reading stuff on LinkedIn with people about pulling their hair out is like, oh, top of funnel is so hard. And I'm like, well, no. I mean, yes and no. I mean, the fact is, my first question to somebody is when you're saying top of funnel so hard, is what's your win rate?
Yeah.
Well, it's 20%. I said, well, you've got more than enough prospects. Top opportunities isn't your issue, right?
Yes.
It's an issue if you continue going along with this rock bottom win rates. But if you learn how to actually sell your product, right? So for me, when I joined a startup as sales leader, what I wanted to do is say, look, how do I double and triple sales without adding headcount? And it's not that hard because what you find is that people, when a company is struggling and they've got low win rates, they just fundamentally don't know how to sell the product. And unless you have something that's completely subpar and substandard, I mean, there's a way that your customers will tell you how to sell it, right? Tell you how to help them make decisions, how to win the order. You just have to go in and pay attention and make it an area of focus. And it's just not today. And this is why we continue to bumble along with these, top heavy funnels that aren't generating the business people want out of them.
Yeah, Andy, it's such a theme that I'm hearing. Regardless of what the number is, I mean, I'm hearing now the average funnel is 2x. It used to be 6x, and so this becomes even more important, right? That especially then top of the funnel, converting more of what's in there. But you made the point to me that sort of what worked in a growth market doesn't work now. What do you think works now? Like what drives this? So the lagging indicators win rate, but what are the leading indicators? What do you see as the shifts we need to make?
Well, yeah, I mean, but yeah, I also think win rate's a leading indicator too. But because if you don't change your behavior, your win rate's dictating what your future performance is going to be. So that's people always talk about it lagging, but in terms of what people should be doing is you got to be creative, right?
Yeah.
You have to. Yeah, there's a general sense that you're getting, and not. Yeah, it's primarily in the SaaS world, but not entirely. But is that yeah, you depend on inbound. And it's like, well, okay, you can't depend on inbound. People say, well, let's do outbound. But for them, outbound is let's just bombard people with emails and social touches. And so it's like, no, do something different. Go to conferences, go knock on doors again. You know, people are back in the office. The decision makers, by and large, are back in the office, right? Get on a plane and go do something different. It's like it may be a little more expensive up front, but if you're selling a product that's six-figure product, get on a plane, go knock on some doors, right? It's try something different because what's happening now isn't
Yeah.
working, and
Yeah.
you get this feeling from sellers. It's like, yeah, we've polluted the channel so badly, we can't get anybody to respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my response to that is, well, hey, when I was at your stage of my career, no one responded to my emails either. Of course, we didn't have email. So it was guaranteed no one was going to respond to them. And no one answered our phone calls because every call, and you appreciate this, every call we made went to a switchboard, to a receptionist,
Yep.
to an admin. We had
Yep.
go through three levels of people just to get to the person we wanted to speak to. And we almost
And then,
never
by the
got,
way, that person, you got the pink slips on your desk, right, from the
that's
missed
right.
call. And whoever's young enough to not know that pink slip, but I remember as a VP at a Fortune 50 coming in and seeing the pink slips and going, "Oh man, I got to
Yeah.
return all these." You just brought me
Well,
back.
and
You know,
we never got through, right? I mean, it was rare that we
right?
got through it. We didn't get through any more frequently than people today get through making phone calls. So
Yeah.
what did we do? Well, I mean, I'm looking at my case. It's like, I doubled down on. I was selling in a local geographic area, but I mean, I doubled down on going to business meetings, right? The Rotary, Kiwanis, whatever those things existed in those days, but now they're different ones
Yes.
today. Chamber meetings, special interest groups. I'd go sit on cars in parking lots, right? You ever do that? Wait in some of the parking lot for somebody business owner to
Yep.
leave their company on a Friday night. Guaranteed way to get them. You did something, you
Yeah.
got creative and you broke the mold. You took risks and find something that worked for you. I mean, for me, one of my effective strategies, I was selling into first job out of school, selling into the construction industry, selling reasonably good sized computer systems on-prem to contractors, is I would hold a seminar every week in our branch office, Wednesdays at 4 p.m. And each week I would send out 10, 15 postcards to CEOs or GMs of construction companies saying I've got a seminar on job cost accounting in our branch office. And then I would just follow up like mad, right? Because I knew if I could get 3 to come in a week, I was going to get one good opportunity out of that.
Well, but
Well,
Andy, there's
no one else is doing that. But
yeah.
that's what I was doing. And you can do something similar today. You just have to
Yeah.
think outside the box.
Yeah, no, and it's to a degree, it's going back to some kind of old school style of stuff. One of the proudest parts in my career was many years ago. I was a national account guy selling in Detroit, and I was selling to the big three auto companies. and I'm thinking through like a lot of things I used to do to get in front of these people because our company had never had a rep call on Detroit. And it was very and I remember even changing cars every 2 days because like if I was calling on Ford, I'd make sure I rented a Ford
Drove in a
and
Ford,
then GM.
absolutely.
And I remember all this
Right.
hassle of changing, but even that level of detail about just in case if they see me pull up, and I will tell you, HR departments would go nuts on this, but with the big three auto companies, Detroit is right on the river with Windsor, Ontario on the other side, and there's a certain sort of dance venue that's prevalent on the other side of Detroit in Windsor.
Yeah.
And I used to go to these dance venues with these, execs from the big three. I won't even say the company names. And get hit with huge bills. And I remember coming back. I worked for Marriott Hotels, pretty like buttoned up company, and I had to go back to my controller. And I actually said to one of the execs, they send me the bill, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this through my company. This is like $2,000 bill. And he said, they all started laughing. The one guy said, oh, the Windsor Ballet. And I said, what? And he said, it goes out in your expense report as the Windsor
Windsor
Ballet.
Ballet. Yeah.
So,
Right.
but yeah, sorry for that old school, like frontline selling story. But this is your whole line of creativity just really, it hit me. I'm even thinking about my own selling. Like I really like that. It's like, am I doing enough to think about what we used to have to do when people wouldn't return our calls?
Yeah. And it's not old school. It's what
Yeah.
works. And
Yes.
this is a thing that's hard for I think some sellers get their minds around the fact it's not old school, new school, modern, old.
Yeah.
It's what works, right?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
talking to people say, oh, people they buy so differently today. It's like, well, sure, the mechanics, the way we buy is different. But we're human beings that haven't substantially evolved, very slowly over
Yeah.
the last 30,000
Yeah.
years. The way we make decisions is still pretty much the same. So how do we
Yeah.
insert ourselves into there and help them make these decisions? Well, that's there might be some things that people were doing 20 years ago that are hugely effective. Well, do it again.
Yeah, yeah, but I do think, yeah, one of those areas of creativity is helping them make decisions. We know the data's all out there that there's committee buys now and decisions are delayed and no decisions on the rise. And I think you hit on a hot button of mine, which is I think that's a key skill for sellers in today's market if they want a buyer to talk to them. And it's not necessarily how to buy my stuff; it's how to source this category. Let me help you work through this complex buying process because you're only doing this once in a while. I'm an expert
Yeah,
at this. I watch
but I
people
think
buy
there's
this all day long.
right. But I think where there's people have to understand that buying is not the same as making a decision. So there's things that buyers do to buy, some of the mechanics you talked about, that are important. And sometimes they need help with that.
Yeah.
But before they get to that stage, they have to make a decision. They have to make two decisions, right? They have to make the decision to make a change, and they have to make the decision who they're going to change with. And then some of the mechanics of the buying sort of happen in parallel or sometimes after that, right? I mean, going through procurement, that's a mechanics of buying, right? But the decision is being made by a different group of people by and large, not by procurement, which is negotiating. So,
Yeah.
it's the same thing true on the sales side is there are things we do that are necessary as sellers, but the buyer doesn't need our selling, they need our help. And so helping and selling are not the same thing.
Right.
They're two distinct
But
motions, and we do
so,
both.
yeah, something you just said that we haven't talked about that I so unbelievably fundamentally agree with is reframing to decision making. And I taught decision making in the past, and so it's helpful for me. That is what they're doing, and there are some fundamental decision making sort of tenets or frameworks or that kind of thing that I believe reps should be taught. Right. And I
Yeah.
remember back in the day bringing decision making to shearing plow. And one of the execs came up after and was like, nobody goes to a decision making class. And he came up after and said, I'm not sure what this is, but I know we need a lot more of it. So
Well, but
I couldn't agree with you more.
we're throwing sellers into the mix, into this competitive environment without really understanding what the buyers are trying to do.
Yeah.
And the elements of what they need to go through to be able to make a decision.
Yeah.
And it's as an entity that's comprised of people, they make decisions the same way humans make decisions.
Yeah.
And the way humans make decisions is, well, first I have to define what my problem is, right? And then define what the outcomes I want to achieve are. And then when I've define those, I want to choose how I want to achieve those outcomes. And then the third order decision is, well, who do I want to work with to achieve those outcomes?
Yeah. And
So
what else I'm sorry, what I'll tell you from having run tons of scenarios where I would put people into decision making environments, people are fundamentally bad at this. And what they often do is either the right people aren't involved or or they have criteria for their decision that's completely overblown. Like, this thing is very present in my mind, but it's not the most important thing. And then they leave out other criteria. Most of us that are selling have won, maybe sometimes for the wrong reason, or we've
Sure.
lost. We've even lost for the wrong. Well, we know we're like, oh, this is actually a much better solution than what they bought. But humans are fundamentally bad at this. So this is why I say it's a huge.
They need our help. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see the data that says 75% of buyers don't want to talk to salespeople.
Yeah.
And again, as I like to say, well, that number is completely wrong, because it's actually 100% of buyers don't want to talk to salespeople. But if you're a salesperson who's talking to a buyer, it's not because they want to, it's because they need to, right?
Yeah.
They're not talking to you. If they could do their job without talking to you, they would.
Yeah.
Right? They need help in some dimension. So what is that help they need? Well, I mean, again, if you understand how humans make decisions, you can sort of place it pretty quickly in the framework of this is what they need from me. And what they need is they need your help to make progress toward making a decision.
And what's just interesting about that is I was speaking with a sales enablement professional, and she focused a lot on the soft skills, a lot on empathy, and what she said about that issue. When you start helping someone, I would say they lean in, and what she said is, like, technically they allow themselves to be more vulnerable, which allows them to share more data. Like, the more you're leaning in and helping, the more they kind of open up. And it struck me when she said that, that I think that is what happens.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a mindset thing for sellers to understand, and on an individual level is I believe that buyers basically hire us to help them. I'm a big believer in the jobs to be done theory, and jobs to be done theory was, Clayton Christensen talked about this, is that when people buy a product, they're not buying the product. What they're buying is the progress the product enables them to achieve in some dimension in their life.
Yeah.
Right. So we're hiring the product to enable us to make progress. So I think by the same token is your buyers, quote unquote, hire you to help them make progress in making a decision.
So
And
to that point, I'm sorry. There's, like, you keep making me think of stuff, but I'm wondering how you feel about the notion of diagnostics. Like, I feel like we diagnose a problem and then we prescribe a solution, and so many of us are coming in and prescribing the solution. And I'm wondering how you feel about sales teams' capability and the way they're being skilled up to do proper diagnostics. Because if I'm a buyer and a seller says to me, I'm not going to try to sell you my widget yet. Let me get under. What do you doing that true diagnostic work? Do you think that's important? Do you think people are good at it today?
yeah, I tend not to look at it as a diagnosis, right?
Okay.
I look at it as a definition, right? So I want to help the buyer define the problem. And that's our first step, right? How are we going to work together to scope out the challenges they have, and then to also define, based on that, the outcomes they want to achieve, right? So I want to be able to show them what the opportunities are and help them think about that, and perhaps in ways they hadn't thought about it before, the opportunities and the outcomes potentially that could be derived from that. And what I'm trying to get to when I do that is my experience has been in my long career in selling 7, 8, 9-figure deals, is that in every instance of every opportunity I've worked on, there was always one thing that was more important than any of the others. One thing the buyer wanted to achieve.
Yeah. Yes.
And our job is to find out what that one thing is.
Yep.
And then, because that's the thing that's truly most important. And my last book, Sell Without Selling Out, I called it their most important thing, right? We want to find out what their most important thing is. It doesn't mean there's aren't other things, but I mean, just giving examples is years and years ago, I was working in the satellite communications business, and we had this opportunity to sell, really was good, the first of its kind. It was a system to provide internet browsing real time in staterooms on cruise ships. And so this was still back in the 90s. So it was pretty new at that point. And so we were working with this big cruise line, and it's Asian-based cruise line, and they at some point had engaged some outside consultants, as they do, and they'd come up with this big RFP document they submitted to us, and we had been down selected. We were a very small company. We were down selected to the final two, and we were going to get this RFP. And so my sales guy had been in Asia, came back, and we were looking at this RFP, and they had a compliance matrix. For those who are familiar with compliance matrix, basically the customer's list of things they want, right? And you have to tell us, do you do it or not do it? If you don't do it, what do you do instead? Blah, blah, blah. 300 items, ran multiple pages. And I looked at the sales guy, said, look, they're not all equally important.
Yeah.
So what's the one that's really driving the decision? What's their one thing? So he got back on a plane, went back to Asia, and met with the CEO. And what we found is that, they wanted high-speed internet browsing in the staterooms, they had voice over IP, blah, 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 blah. He came back and he said, or he actually called me. He said, so this is what they want. He said, the only thing the CEO really cares about is having a satellite link that never goes down between headquarters and the onboard casinos, because he wants to be able to know up to the minute how much money they're taking in on the casinos. Now, that wasn't even in the RFP anywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? And so we basically ignored the compliance table and focused our bid on how do we configure the system such that with hot standbys and dual links and so on, that link was never going to go down on a cruise ship, that he was never going to not know up to the minute what the take was from the onboard casinos. And we won the deal. It was a huge deal for us at that time. But that was because it was their one thing. And I can go back and spend 2 hours giving you stories about customers worked with was the one thing. And when you really understand it.
Yep. I could do the same. And I wish at some point maybe I'll find something to disagree with you on. But that also, like we think of those, it's not it's not only that most important thing. It's also the most important player. And a lot of people talk about decision makers, and we tend to think in terms of thought leaders. Like, who is the person in the room that other people look to and go, well, shit, if Andy feels it, then boom, like my idea is gone. And so it's like, who is that? We think about who is that key player. And it could be a thought leader. It might not even be because a lot of times the decision makers are looking to the thought leader. And what does that thought leader care about? It's actually the simplicity that you're exactly right. That's what wins. And there might be a couple things you win on with a couple different players, but I agree. And so,
I'm glad you brought that up, because that really is the second part of the equation: is what's the most important thing and who is it most important to?
Correct.
And to your point, it's not necessarily a line, the guy at the top of the chain. It could be who's the bully with the pulpit, basically.
That's why we tend to think in terms of thought leader, because there is a person in the room. And it's funny too, because we were talking the other day about how to qualify and find that person, and someone outside of my organization said it is the person that other people turn and look to. Like if you're in a meeting or on a Zoom call, you can see that they're giving that reference. So reverence. So we just stumbled on complexity, and this is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. I want to switch this a little bit.
Sure.
So I've talked to a lot of CROs, CSOs, revenue enablement folks, and lately I've spoken to 5 frontline sellers, 5 AEs with varying levels of sophistication. And I wanted to build a channel that I call the voice of the rep. And it's like, all right, for all you C-level folks I've talked to, go listen to these 5 reps, right? And listen to what they have to say. And here is the constant across all 5. They said, you're killing me. The complexity is killing me. Getting deals done, getting solution configurations approved, getting deals approved. It's everything is so complex now. And it ties into that. Buyers buy in a relatively simple way, as you just pointed out. But yeah, reps are screaming about this to me right now. Say, my companies are killing me.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's new necessarily.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. I mean, because again, just look at my experience selling these immensely more complex, satellite communication systems compared to, SaaS systems people are selling today that have some complexity to it. Couldn't even begin to compare, right?
Yeah.
And my solution was, and actually I just had this conversation with a seller earlier this week, a client, was that selling happens internally and externally. And if you look at your role as a seller externally, there's a leadership component to it, right? Because you are leading the buyer. The buyer's looking to you to inspire them to take action at some level, right?
Yeah.
Through your actions, you're doing that. And the same thing is true internally, is you need to enroll people in the things you're working on internally. And every company is going to have bureaucracy and complexity. And the only way you try to simplify this, and this is not being a team player, but it's, you do have to look out for your own interests, is that you need to sell internally. You need to have people excited
Yeah.
about the things you're
Yeah.
working on. And to the extent you create this vision of success for your buyers about what success is going to look like using your product, you have that sort of the counterpart vision with your colleagues internally. Well, this is, if we succeed and get this deal and roll this out, this is what it's going to mean for us.
Yes.
And so your focus in both places, as much as you're focusing externally, you have to devote time internally to get people enrolled and excited, just like buyers, in your projects.
But
And
it sounds like that can cut through some of the complexity, right? If you're telling your story properly internally, that might relieve some of the complexity and get
sure.
your deals done better. Yeah. I
Yeah, I mean,
agree.
and certainly the
Yeah.
amount of time you have to spend on an ongoing basis, because if you work in a good sized organization, they got a lot of sellers, and there's a certain focal point, let's say for engineering support or whatever. Yeah, they've got a lot of people contending for their time.
Yeah.
And again, we want people to be good team players. But the fact is, you're trying to get your deal done as a seller. I want to have that person give me priority on their time when I come in. Now, the several ways I do that. One is, I live up to my commitments. I close my deals. I'm doing good business, but also I have to sell them and get them enrolled in the, like I
Yeah.
said, in the project. And if you do that, then hey, you might get a little bit faster response from them when they're getting busy. It sounds a little cutthroat to some degree, but the fact is, you got to look out for yourself in this environment,
Yep.
because if you're not doing it, somebody else is. And if you're working on the type of deals that are really driving the company forward, that are strategic for the company, then you might want to say, oh, well, sure, the CEO will make sure they give me the time. Doesn't work that way, right? I mean, we've all seen passive resistance work in parts of employees that make their own decisions about how they want to spend their time. So that was, for me, was always a big one. And I love to tell the story, because this is an absolutely true story. Once when I was in a meeting, I was VP at this company, and smaller company, but we were doing some really large deals, and CEO knocks on the door and says, he said, I didn't realize you were CEO of the company. And I said, whoa, what are you talking about? I'm not CEO. You're the CEO. He goes, yeah, but I just did my daily walk around and asked people what they're doing. And they all said they're working on a project for you. And I said,
Yeah.
that's just what we want.
Yeah, it's such a valid point, because I'm thinking back to my experience as a Fortune 50 sales VP, and yeah, there were certain people who could get things done more quickly, and they had more credibility internally. Like, that's what came to mind when you were saying that, and I think it's such a valid point. Yeah, I have like 100 more questions for you, but as you and I both know, we don't want our podcast to go too long. But I literally have so many more things I want to
Do it
talk to you
again.
about. This is, yeah, we'll do it again. I truly, honestly enjoyed it. I was looking forward to
Likewise.
this, and yeah. So yeah, you've been super generous with your time and your ideas, and thank you so much.
Oh, Brian, it's been fun. Yeah, I really look forward to doing it again. And yeah, your episode on my podcast will be coming out shortly too.
Excellent. Thank you.